Like a silver streak across the midnight sky, our stories move with a brilliance and speed you will never forget. Experience high-octane drama and the thrill of a narrative that never slows down for anything. Click subscribe now and catch the streak before it disappears into the dark.
The moment my father lifted his glass and said, "To the one who actually made us proud," I felt 60 pairs of eyes slide from my brother to me, and I just kept eating my salad. That was 6 months ago, and I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what I should have said, what I could have said, but I didn't say anything. Because I've never said anything, that's always been my problem. Let me start at the beginning. My father is a cardiothoracic surgeon, has been for 32 years. He has plaques on the wall of his office, a waiting list, 3 months long, and an opinion about every single life choice I've ever made. My mother retired from hospital administration 8 years ago, but still talks about it like she's running the place. My older brother followed them both into medicine. He's an orthopedic resident now, which, according to our dinner table, is the second most important thing a person can do with their life. The most important, apparently, is what my father does. I'm an electrician, not an electrical engineer, not someone who designs systems from a corner office. I wire houses, I troubleshoot commercial panels, I climb into attics in July, wearing long sleeves because the insulation will eat you alive if you don't. I've been doing it for 7 years. I'm good at it. I have my own small crew now, 2 guys who work with me on residential projects, and we stay busy. My family has never asked me a single question about my work. Not one. They know I'm in the trades. That's how my mother says it when she has to mention me to her friends. Oh, Jorie's in the trades. Like she's announcing I joined a traveling circus. My actual name is Jorie, short for Marjorie, which my grandmother insisted on, and which I've been shortening since I was 5 years old. My boyfriend's name is Sullivan. He goes by Sewell. Everyone who knows him does, and when I first told my parents his name, my mother said, "Sullivan? That's a surname, isn't it?" Like I'd brought home a filing cabinet. Sewell and I met 4 years ago at a job site. Not romantically at first. He was the project manager for a commercial renovation I was running electrical on, and we argued about timeline for 2 weeks before we actually talked about anything else. He's thoughtful and stubborn, and he grew up on a sheep farm in Montana that his family has worked for 4 generations. He has a degree in agricultural management that he got because his father made him, and he uses approximately none of it because what he actually does is project management for construction. He's good at it, genuinely good, and he does it because he loves building things, not because of the salary, which is, in fact, very good. None of this has ever mattered to my family. When I brought Sewell home the first time 2 Christmases ago, my father shook his hand and immediately asked him where he went to school. Sewell told him. My father said, "Oh," in that specific tone he has, the one that means he's already finished evaluating you and you came up short, and then turned the conversation to my brother, who had just gotten into his residency program. Sewell handled it. He always handles it. That's one of the things I love about him, and also one of the things that has made me over the years worse at handling it myself. Because watching him not take the bait made me think maybe I didn't need to take it either. That we could just exist alongside my family and their opinions, adjacent but not wounded. I was wrong about that. My brother got engaged last spring. His fiancée's name is Adele, and she is perfectly nice. I mean that genuinely, not as a loaded compliment. She's kind, she's sharp, she works in public health policy, and she has the patience of a person who was clearly raised in a calm house. I like her. I was happy for them both. The engagement party was my parents' idea. They wanted to host it at their house, the house I grew up in, the one my mother has spent 15 years redecorating, and they wanted it to be a sit-down dinner for 60 people. Because, as in my family, celebrations are never just for the people being celebrated. They're also for the audience. Adele's parents flew in from Seattle, her father, a man I'll call Mr. Beaumont because that's how he introduced himself. Not please call me Richard, just a firm handshake. And Beaumont, good to meet you, was a quiet man with an easy smile and the kind of stillness that made you want to lean toward him when he spoke. Her mother was warm, in a no-nonsense way, the kind of woman who would immediately help you find your coat if you said you were cold. I liked them. I remember thinking that Adele came by her steadiness honestly. Sewell and I arrived together, which we always do, and my mother met us at the door and hugged me and said hello to Sewell, and immediately started telling me about the centerpieces she'd found. We went inside. The house smelled like good candles and catered food, and my father was in the kitchen talking to someone from his hospital, and my brother was glowing the way people glow at the beginning of things. We were seated at a table near the window. My brother and Adele were at the center table with her parents and my parents, and a few family friends who have known my brother since he was in Little League. I've never taken it, personally, that seating arrangement. I understand that the principal players need to be at the principal table, but there's something about being a grown adult and still being placed at what is essentially the kids' table that gets in you in a specific way. Not like a wound, more like a draft. Something cold you feel, but can't quite locate. The dinner was lovely. Genuinely. The food was good, the speeches were warm, and Adele's mother told a story about the first time Adele called home to talk about my brother and how she knew from the first 30 seconds. The room laughed. Sewell was talking to the man beside him about some renovation project the man had done on his house, and I was watching my brother's face when he looked at Adele, and I was actually happy. Genuinely, fully happy for him. Then my father stood up. He had his wine glass, a big pour of the Bordeaux he only opens for what he considers significant occasions, and he tapped the side of it with his knife, and the room went quiet. He gave a beautiful toast to my brother. I'm not being sarcastic. It was genuinely beautiful. He talked about watching my brother perform his first suture in a training lab, about the discipline it took, about how proud it made him to say, "My son, the doctor." People were moved. I was moved. And then he looked at me. He had this smile on his face that I know. I've known it my whole life. It's the smile that means he's about to say something that will hurt me in a way he will later claim was not intended. "And then there's our Jorie," he said, "who has always marched to the beat of her own drum." Soft laughter from the room, the polite kind. Jorie decided early on that she didn't want the path we laid out for her. He tilted his glass slightly, like he was gesturing at the idea of me. "She's in the trades. Her boyfriend works in construction." Another small smile. "They're very happy doing what they do." The way he said it. I can't fully explain it if you haven't heard it, but there's a particular register men like my father use when they mean to diminish something while maintaining plausible deniability, like they're just describing facts, like they're just being accurate, as if the flatness of their voice isn't itself the cruelty. Soul's hand found my knee under the table. I didn't say anything. I smiled at the tablecloth. I was 31 years old, and I was smiling at a tablecloth because my father had just introduced me to 60 people as the child who couldn't manage to do anything worth toasting. And I did not want to make a scene at my brother's engagement party. And so I sat there and I held still while the moment passed over me. The toast moved on. Someone laughed at something. The room began to breathe again. Sewell leaned toward me slightly and I shook my head, just barely. Just enough that he understood. Later, not here. I went to the bathroom after the toasts were done, and I stood at the sink, and I ran cold water over my wrists for about 30 seconds, which is a thing I started doing in college when I needed to stop crying before I was ready to stop. And then I dried my hands and went back out. What happened next, I did not anticipate. Adele's father, Mr. Beaumont, had made his way over to the window table. Not to me. I don't want to make this about me approaching it wrong. He was talking to Sewell. He'd clearly come over mid-conversation because Sewell had been talking earlier to the man beside him about some electrical panel issue, and Mr. Beaumont had apparently overheard something and wandered over. I came back from the bathroom to find them deep in what looked like a real conversation. Not polite conversation. The kind where both people are leaning slightly forward. I sat down and Saul glanced at me. That quick look, "You okay?" And I nodded, and he said, "Jorie, this is Mr. Beaumont, Adele's father." I said it was nice to meet him, that I'd enjoyed his wife's speech. He shook my hand and then looked back at Sewell and said, "So you're the Sewell that did the Harbor View project?" Sewell paused, just for a second. Then he said, "Yes, sir, that was us." Something shifted in Mr. Beaumont's face. Not dramatically. He wasn't a dramatic man. But he sat down in the empty chair across from Sewell and said quietly, "That building is why my company was able to expand. We moved our whole Pacific Northwest operations there. The build timeline you held, in that weather, with those subcontractors. I've been doing commercial real estate for 30 years, and I've never seen a project managed that cleanly." Sewell said, "I had a good electrical team." He looked at me when he said it. Mr. Beaumont looked at me too. I said, "I was on that project, actually." He blinked. Then he looked at Sewell, then back at me, and said, "You ran the electrical on Harbor View?" I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know what it meant to have that building finished on time? Do you know how many businesses were waiting on that square footage?" I said I knew it was a big project. He shook his head slowly. "It wasn't just big. That building anchored an entire commercial district. Half the tenants had signed leases contingent on our occupancy date. If that electrical had slipped, if you'd missed the inspection window, the whole thing would have cascaded." He picked up his water glass and then set it down without drinking. "I've tried to find out who managed that crew. I asked the general contractor twice." Sewell said, "She doesn't love the spotlight, that's true." "I don't." Mr. Beaumont looked at me for a long moment. "Your father just toasted you as someone in the trades," he said. "It wasn't a question." I said yes. "I own 11 commercial buildings," he said. "And the most important one I have exists because of the work you did." He said it the way you say something you've decided to say out loud, deliberate and clear. I think that's worth knowing. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I didn't cry. But my throat closed in a way that made it hard to answer him, so I just nodded. And he nodded back, and then he said something to Sewell about wanting to talk to him before the end of the night, and then he stood and went back across the room. Sewell put his arm around me. I said quietly, "Don't." He said, "Okay." We sat there for a minute. Then I said, "I want to go say something to my father." Sewell looked at me. "Not tonight," I said. "Not here. But I want to. I've been not saying things my whole life and I'm tired of it." He said, "Okay, whenever you're ready." I wasn't ready that night. I watched my father work the room for another hour. Charming, confident, the kind of man who makes a room feel like it belongs to him. And I thought about all the versions of this conversation I'd rehearsed over the years and never had. The things I'd swallowed in the car on the way home from dinners. The way my mother would always call the next day and say something like, "Your father worries about you, you know. He just shows it strangely." As if that were a reasonable explanation. As if worry had to come out as condescension to count. On the way home that night, Sewell drove and I looked out the window at the freeway lights and thought about Harbor View. I'd spent 8 months on that project. I'd wired a 16-story commercial building in a coastal climate with 3 different general contractors rotating through. Because the first 2 couldn't hit their dates, and I'd hit every inspection window, and I'd brought my crew home without a single injury. I was proud of it. I'd been proud of it every day since. I just never had anyone outside the industry tell me why it mattered. I didn't call my father the next day, or the day after. I needed time to figure out what I actually wanted to say and what I was actually afraid of, because those are usually different things. What I wanted to say, "I know you love me, I know you wanted a specific kind of life for me, and I didn't choose it, but you have spent 30 years making me feel like what I do is a footnote, and I have spent 30 years letting you. What I was afraid of, that he would look at me with the same smile from the party, that he would say something like, "Of course I'm proud of you, Jorie. I never said I wasn't," and make me feel crazy for having needed to say it at all. I called him 3 weeks later. I told him I wanted to talk about the toast. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I didn't mean anything by it." And I said, "I know you didn't, but I want to tell you how it landed anyway." And this is the part I hadn't expected. He didn't hang up. He didn't deflect. He listened. I told him that I have been doing this for 7 years, and he has never once asked me about a project. I told him that Sul is one of the most capable people I know, and my father has never asked him a single real question. I told him about Harbor View, which he did not know about, because I had never told him, because somewhere along the way I had stopped sharing things with my family that I thought they would dismiss. I told him that walking back from that bathroom at the party and finding Adele's father having a real conversation with Sul about real work we did, that it broke something in me that had been bending for a very long time. He was quiet for a while after that. Then he said, "I didn't know about the building." I said, "I know." He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "Because I've learned not to, Dad. Because I've learned that things I'm proud of are things you have a way of making smaller." That landed. I could hear it. He didn't say I was wrong. What he said eventually was, "I think I've confused caring about you with having opinions about your choices." He said it slowly, like he was working it out as he said it, and I think those are different things. I said, "Yes, they are." We talked for a long time after that. Not resolved. I want to be honest about that. These things don't resolve in one phone call. My father is 78 years old with a lifetime of assumptions about what success looks like, and one conversation doesn't undo that. But it cracked something open, something that needed air. My mother called me 2 days later and said she'd talked to my father and that she was sorry too. And I believed her, mostly, though I also know that her version of events will be slightly gentler to my father than mine is. And that's okay. That's how families work. Everyone has their own recording of the same moment. My brother texted me a few days after that. He said, "Dad told me about your call. I should have said something at the party. I'm sorry I didn't." That one actually hit harder than I expected. Because my brother and I have never been close the way some siblings are, and I had always assumed it was because we were different. But reading that text, I thought, maybe it was just because we'd both been trying, separately, to survive the same household. I said, "It's okay. You were getting engaged," he said, still. Sul and I went back for dinner at my parents' house, about 6 weeks after that phone call. My father asked Sul what he was working on, real question, present tense, eye contact. Sul told him about a project he was managing, a mixed-use development on the east side of the city. My father asked a follow-up question. Sul answered. My father nodded like someone who was actually taking information in. It wasn't perfect. My father still introduced me to a neighbor who stopped by as our daughter, she's an electrician, with a small pause before the word that I don't think he'll ever fully lose. But there was no smirk this time, no audience. Just a fact stated out loud by a man who was maybe beginning to learn that facts are not lesser things for being unfamiliar. Before we left that night, my father walked Sul to the car while I was saying goodbye to my mother. I don't know exactly what was said. When Sul got in on his side and I asked, he just said, he asked about Harbor View. He wanted to know how we held the timeline. I looked at the house through the windshield. The light in my father's office was on. "What did you tell him?" I said. Sul started the car. "I told him it was mostly you." He glanced at me. He said he believed it. I looked at the light a little longer. Then I said, "Good." And Sul pulled out of the driveway, and I watched my parents' house get smaller in the side mirror, and I thought about the building. 16 stories. All the businesses inside it, the people who showed up every morning to work and went home every night, none of them knowing or needing to know how the lights stayed on. That's mostly how it goes when you do this work. Nobody thinks about it until it stops working, and if you've done your job right, it never stops. I used to mind that. I don't as much anymore.